does evolution imply progress? According to Darwin, competition and blind chance drive improvement. The struggle for life is, at root, a lottery, albeit one that may have purpose. Darwin is somewhat ambivalent on this point, but he comments on the dynamics of his theory of descent with modification through natural selection. He writes, "The inhabitants of each successive period in the world's history have beaten their predecessors in the race for life, and are, insofar, higher in the scale of nature, and this may account for that vague and yet ill-defined sentiment felt by many paleontologists that organization, on the whole, has progressed, old forms having been supplanted by new and improved forms of life, produced by the laws of variation acting round us, and preserved by natural selection." Darwin ends his book with an uncharacteristic flourish, designed to make the rather unpalatable notion of natural selection reflect well on the Creator. He writes, "As natural selection works solely by and for the good of each being, all corporeal and mental endowments will tend to progress toward perfection, produced by laws acting around us. These laws, being growth with reproduction, inheritance, which is almost implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct action of the external conditions of life and from use and disuse, a ratio of increase so high as to lead to a struggle for life, and, as a consequence, to natural selection, entailing divergence of character and the extinction of less improved forms. Thus, from the war of nature, and from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms, or one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms more beautiful have been, and are being, evolved." Modern biologists are usually extremely careful to stress that there is no implicit evolutionary process leading naturally to improvement. Evolution, to scientists, does not imply any imminent purpose or historical progress. Organisms adapt themselves to the conditions of life, but the fact that better adapted organisms thrive at the expense of the less adapted implies no value judgment. Better means more rather than superior. We can choose individually whether, on the one hand, to believe that evolution by natural selection and the parallel development of humanity's interdependent civilization, where wealth, complexity, specialization, and cooperation have all increased over time, are merely happy accidents thrown up by random or indifferent forces, or, on the other hand, to impute some conscious intent or purpose to these developments. Scientists are right not to pronounce on these matters. Yet even if evolution appears to be just a happy accident, which of course could in the future turn into a less happy accident, we humans may not be wrong to believe in progress. We can impose a value judgment on pure chance. We can see it as our duty to advance evolution further, even if we do not believe that there was originally any purpose behind it. Six universal principles implied by evolution by natural selection. In summary, what are the essential patterns that natural selection reveals? Jane Jacobs lays out three themes that were common to all the evolutionists of the 19th century. They were: 1. Differentiation emerging from generality. One original species leads to all others. New species are formed from an existing species. This is a universal principle. In knowledge, one branch gives rise to one or more new branches through specialization. In the economy, The same thing happens when one industry gives rise to more specialized branches thereof, or when one firm spawns spin-offs, each of which develops its own particular variations. Variation is the key to development. 2. Differentiations become generalities from which further differentiations emerge. Each differentiation becomes a new generality, which can then give birth to new differentiations. Increasing complexity and diversity emerge. As Jane Jacobs says, a simple basic process, when repeated and repeated and repeated, produces staggering diversity. Variation never stops. 3. Development depends on co-development. Development of one species requires co-development of other species. All forms of life, Darwin says, make together one grand system. One of the characters in Jane Jacobs' The Nature of Economies elaborates on this theme. A horse requires more than its ancestors. A horse implies grass. Grass implies topsoil. Topsoil implies breakup of rocks, development of lichens, worms, beetles, compost-making bacteria, animal droppings. No end of other evolution and lineages besides that of the horse. Darwin was alive in nature's web of interdependent species. Today's global economy demonstrates the same pattern of co-development and intricate interdependence. In addition to these three evolutionary themes, Darwin's theory of natural selection contains another three crucial twists. They are: 1. The odds against survival are high, leading to a struggle for life. In nature, in ideas, and in economies, so much is produced that only a small fraction can survive. Failure is the normal condition. This implies that only organisms producing many offspring and generating a stream of new variants can hope to beat the odds. 2. The conditions of life determine whether species and individuals survive or not. In contrast to the French naturalist Jean Lamarck, 1744 to 1829, who claimed that species adapted to the demands of the environment, Darwin held that the environment was the determining factor. For Lamarck, species evolved to survive. For Darwin, species naturally evolve, and the environment decides whether or not they survive. This may sound like a subtle distinction, but it is crucial. Darwin implies that species, and to an even greater degree individuals, cannot hope to control their own destiny. This is a key insight for business and for individuals in life generally. If a business or a career is failing, there are only two remedies: to change the environment or to change the character of the business or the individual. Markets usually evolve by changing the winners, whether the winners are firms, technologies, or nations, not by changing the way that the incumbent winner, for which read incipient loser, behaves. In evolution by natural selection, the environment is more powerful than the species, and the species is more important than the individual. In economic development, the market is more important than any particular industry, and the species of producers or consumers is more important than any individual firm or consumer. It follows that if any business enterprise or individual is not being successful, a radical change of environment or behavior is necessary, and even this may not be sufficient. And finally, 3. The process of natural selection contains high degrees of luck, randomness, and arbitrary development. Natural selection is a process of experimentation in which luck is paramount. So is business. Darwin's Economic Primer. Bruce Henderson, the founder of the Boston Consulting Group, said, Darwin is a better guide to competition than economists. This is an important observation, although perhaps hardly surprising. Darwin's idea of natural selection was, as we have said, in part analogous to the theories of competition of Thomas Malthus and Adam Smith. So, in applying the lessons of natural selection to business, we are, in a sense, coming home to a common intellectual heritage. And to be fair to modern economists, some have incorporated evolutionary aspects into their theories. Differentiation emerging from generality. The development of economies, industries, individual corporations, and individual careers follows the same evolutionary path described by Darwin and earlier evolutionists. Differentiation emerges from generality. Specialization means that what was previously one market develops into more than one, ending with the concept of the market of one that can be served economically by tailoring standard product to individual demand. One industry regularly forks into two. The computer industry, for example, forks into the hardware industry and the software industry. Then the hardware industry forks into the personal computer, or PC, industry and the market for larger machines. Then the PC industry forks into the retail store market and the market for direct delivery via phone and internet. The PC industry also forks into a large number of individual product segments. This endlessly repeated process results in a richer world. The richest economies are the most diverse, with the greatest degrees of subdivision and specialization. But the process of differentiation from generality also supplies a clue for any business or individual wishing to create a new world that can perhaps be owned by the business or individual. The clue? Create a new segment based on greater specialization. Take one market or industry and make it two. This opportunity always exists. It is the way that markets must evolve, and all that is required to realize a new segment is imagination allied to the following simple method. Focus on a subgroup of customers that has some homogeneity internally within the putative customer group and some differentiation from the rest of the current market. Work out how to serve that customer group better so that extra value is created for them, but without a proportionate increase in the cost to supply them, and ideally with a decrease in cost. Typically, this can be done by cutting out or downgrading elements of the product or service that are important to the market as a whole, but not to your target customer group. Once you have found your new market, use the co-development principle as much as possible. Identify techniques and partners from other markets and industries who embody the highest standards of value delivery, who are highly evolved economic species. Then, appropriate their ideas or make them partners. Finally, aim to become and remain the standard, the model, and the leader in your new market segment. So much for general evolutionary principles, but we can go much further. Darwin's particular genius was to build on earlier evolutionary theories, none of which was very specific, and describe the way that natural selection operates. We can now parallel this process in thinking about our own business world. You're invited to collaborate, in a typically Darwinian way, by extending and applying the somewhat general thoughts that I'll share with you in a moment to your own more specific, differentiated context, and to take the thoughts to the next level of their evolution. Where does evolution by selection work in business? Very clearly, at the level of products. Depending on how good the economic information inside a product is, and how well the product packages the information for customers, and how well adapted the product is to its market, relative to competing products, products will either prosper or die young. Products live in families, both vertically over time and horizontally at the same time. Products live in a generation game. All products will eventually die, but the most successful products will live long enough to generate at least one offspring, a next-generation product or a same-generation variant. The most successful products will generate many of both. For every successful product, however, there will be many that never get off the drawing board, never survived the test market, died shortly after launch, or never produced any offspring. Successful products will all be able to say, "Not one of our progenitors died in infancy." But progenitors are rare. Most products die before they reproduce. Some $160 billion is spent in the developed countries each year on research and development, but only 5% of that money succeeds in generating a product or service. And even for the few products that are born, there is a high death rate in the early months and years. What is success for a technology? A unit of economic information or a product? To beat the odds against selection. To have many offspring, to gain currency, that is, intellectual currency, or dollars. But what is success for the owners of a technology or of a product? Surely to make the largest possible long-term profit from selling the technology or product in one form or another. This requires making the product or technology proprietary to the owners. This also tends to produce more variation, more experimentation, more products, more losers, and more winners. Recognition of intellectual property rights does not restrict the evolution of economic information. It tends to speed it up because it encourages variation to justify or to avoid the intellectual property and to convert it to currency. 4 lessons of economic selection for products and marketing. First, product ideas will be stronger, more likely to survive and reproduce, if they have emerged from a struggle for life, from substantial competition. This does not necessarily mean that you should launch a multitude of products, just that you should consider and test a large number, so that those that emerge have faced genuine competition. For example, the publisher of this book has a policy of only publishing 20 books a year. This is very sensible. It ensures that each book can be properly structured and edited, marketed, and promoted. But it would not be wise for him to accept the first 20 books that came along that he felt were acceptable. He should carefully consider perhaps 100 to 200 potential books and set up some competitive process between them before choosing his 20. If he selects the wrong 20, another publisher will gain the market's support. For some firms and markets, putting out a lot of products and letting the market decide which ones survive is a sound procedure. When Sony introduced the Walkman, it flooded the market with hundreds of variants, letting the market decide which few would survive. In credit cards, Capital One is a very successful firm that regularly generates a large number of new ideas, puts them to the market test, and mercilessly kills off the majority that fail. It relies heavily on direct mail shots to attract new customers, puts out perhaps 300 different products, varying the letter, the color of the envelope, the position of the address, and so on, and then uses the response rates from its test markets to decide which mailing will be the standard one. The company is currently taking a risk with a major new product, trying to parlay its data mining and direct marketing competencies into the sale of mobile phones. If the experiment works, fine. If not, it will be swiftly terminated. One of the world's most successful consumer goods firms, Procter & Gamble, took the revolutionary and apparently wasteful step back in 1930 of allowing direct competition between its own brands. This provided challenges that often didn't exist elsewhere in the marketplace. Brands couldn't rest on their laurels. Discomfort stimulated improvement and cut complacency. Although this formula worked extremely well, it took almost 30 years for rival firms to copy it. Although it's our best route to success, we hate competition. Procter & Gamble also has an extremely rigorous and structured product development process, including mandatory test marketing to see whether product concept expectations are met and whether product sales are sustainable. Few concepts make it through to production. Even successful products are subject to routine, ongoing consumer research to aid in further product refinement and innovation. P&G has a far higher ratio of potential products to actual products than most of its competitors, and a far greater propensity to produce new generations of successful products. The second lesson is that new product variants will arrive sooner or later, whether you introduce them or not. Natural selection does not care which organism mutates or does not mutate, lives or dies. Economic selection does not care who owns the new product, it just wants to see it arrive. The market doesn't care whether Bic or Wilkinson Sword or Gillette is the market leader in disposable razors, but it does want to see new razors emerge. The market doesn't care whether the big brewers or new specialists supply light beer or imported beer or beer from Mexico or micro-brew beer, but it does want to see new eruptions of product variants. The third lesson, therefore, is to scatter new breeds around your core product. Fill up the potential product spaces so that newcomers can't move into those niches. You might not think that a new type of product, cherry cola, for example, or healthier versions of mainline food products, has much chance of success. Still, have a go and let the market decide. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, it was already clear that healthier food was a growing trend, yet, in general, the main food manufacturers stood back. The result? New specialists came in and filled the niches. In some cases, as with Wilkinson Sword and Gillette, neglecting to fill a niche can eventually mean a challenge to the core business itself. Fill up all your niches, or potential niches. Reinvent your product. The Internet supplies a great example where leading firms have often, and even usually, failed to fill up all the niches or potential niches, and in this case, the Internet niche may end up comprising the majority of the market. Whatever else it is, the Internet is clearly a channel of distribution that comprises a separate market segment. The leaders in most real-world businesses have been slow to become the leaders in online provision of their service, partly because they have been unfamiliar with the virtual world, and partly because they fear that the Internet will simply cannibalize their existing demand, and do so at lower prices. These fears are partly justified, but not entirely beside the point. A new niche need not call forth a new leader, but it will, unless the existing leader dominates it. Had Barnes & Noble, the leader in real-world bookselling, embraced the Internet opportunity at the outset, the word Amazon would still just connote a large river or a nation of female warriors. Now, Barnes & Noble is stuck, probably forever, with having to share its market with the upstart. The fourth lesson is that product and service improvement can and should always be accelerated. Competitive selection drives faster evolution, and evolution proceeds by new and better generations of older products. Not just new variants, but also new and better versions of the old product. Tolerate, even encourage failure. It's an intrinsic part of the process. Plan to accept your own failures. Celebrate differences. Procter & Gamble's experience with Olestra, a fat substitute, is a case in point. The company's original vision was to develop an easily digestible fat that would help premature babies gain weight. The problem was that the fat-like compound, composed of a fat molecule bonded to a sugar molecule, passed through babies unabsorbed. P&G redirected the product to develop a fat substitute product. Although it took many years to perfect, the process resulted in Olean, a product that tastes and fries like fat but does not digest in the same way. Olean is now incorporated into Frito-Lay chips and fat-free Pringles. Evolution is slow or non-existent unless there is competition, unless the cycle of struggle for life, selection, and improvement or variation is allowed to operate. But evolution can be speeded up by you or by someone else. Evolve your products by selection, or someone else may do it for you. Winners and their sex lives. The few winners should breed prolifically. If the market proclaims a new initiative a stunning success, get the bandwagon going as fast and as far as possible. This means reproduction. It means new generations of improved versions of whatever is successful. It means backing the winners with cash and the best skills available from anywhere. Too many winners sit in monasteries or nunneries, or opt for vasectomy. They while away their days pleasantly enough, fulfilling existing customers' needs in the same way that they first stumbled across, enjoying easy orders and fat margins. Until someone else invents something new, perhaps an improved version of your own product or service. Winners who don't have sex will die out. Winners who merely have a normal sex life will horribly underperform in relation to their potential. Winners have an evolutionary duty to have a superabundant sex life that produces a large number of offspring. What does this mean in business? It means taking the winning product or service as far afield geographically as you possibly can, so long as it will still be a winner in the new environment. It means adapting the winner to local markets. It means introducing new generations of product faster and more extensively than those with less successful products do. It means forming spin-off teams and companies that can take what is best and apply it to new products, new customers, and new geographic areas. It means squeezing the last particle of possible expansion out of what you have. It means taking a few risks. The risk you should worry most about is the risk of not taking risks. This is counterintuitive. Surely it is those who are less successful who should be trying harder to improve what they have. This is normal business reasoning. But economic selection implies that when we have something good and successful, it must be improved and spread, and the new generations improved and spread as far and as fast as possible. Selection puts enormous pressure for improvement and reproduction on the organisms that are most successful to start with. Selection also gives winners the inbuilt mechanisms needed to keep winning. Use them. The lessons of selection for firms and divisions. Markets progress via selection. This necessarily requires the deselection, or death, of most of what is tested. This clearly happens at the product and subproduct level. But if there is a free market in companies, deselection will also happen to corporations. They will go bust or be taken over. In nature, a failed organism becomes food for more successful creatures. The same happens in business. When a company fails or is taken over, its resources are freed up for more productive use. From society's viewpoint, this is generally a good thing. Within multi-business corporations, failing businesses can be tolerated for too long, especially when they are protected from internal or external competition. If a lion reared in a zoo were to escape into the wild, its life expectancy would be low. It wouldn't know how to compete for food. If divisions of large corporations don't have to compete in the market with all comers for their cash, supplies, technologies, talent, and customers, they will rapidly turn into zoo lions. Prolonged subsidy of divisions inhibits evolution. Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. R.A. Fisher published his Fundamental Theorem of Natural Selection in 1958. It was already known that the average fitness of a population grows from generation to generation. Fisher found that the larger the variance in fitness, the faster the average growth of the population. Greater variation implies greater improvement and therefore faster growth. Technologies, products, teams, firms, and markets that experiment the most and produce most variance will improve fastest, and faster improvement leads to faster market growth. What adapts faster to the conditions of life, if you like, what gets better according to the judgment of the environment, gains market share and earns superior margins. Fisher developed the mathematics describing how small variations cause big changes, bigger than one might expect. He showed that if a new allele, an alternative characteristic, which I'll explain in Chapter 2, produced by mutation, gives an animal just a 1% advantage in fitness, the allele will spread through the entire population within 100 generations. The biological market works quickly and efficiently. In business, it's difficult to measure something that customers prefer by a margin of just 1%. But imagine that there is a 10% advantage between one firm's product and another. This will translate into far more than a 10% difference in sales, market share, and profits. Pay close attention, therefore, to even so-called marginal customer preferences. Over time, they will count. Whether customers vote you a loser compared to your most significant rival, even if it is by a tiny margin, expect trouble ahead. If you can't persuade a fair sample of customers in your chosen niche that you are measurably better, why are you in the market at all? Business is a generation game. Markets, products, brands, technologies, and companies can be viewed as part of long evolving lines. They are part of a chain of inheritance in which variation is increasing and being tested. The same is true of an individual's career. Business is a generation game. Each product has forebears and, if it is successful, many generations of offspring. The same is true of markets, of companies, of technologies, and of customers. No current generation is an island. It is part of a continent of predecessors and successors. The trick is to find what is most fitting to the environment and ensure that it is passed on and improved as much as possible. Improvement drives expansion. Fisher's theorem predicts that markets, products, brands, technologies, companies, and individuals who improve their fit with the environment faster than other markets, etc., will expand faster and be more profitable. The experience curve, explaining evolutionary improvement. The learning curve and its derivative, the experience curve, help to explain why. The Boston Consulting Group, BCG, found in the 1960s that there was a regular relationship between unit cost and accumulated experience, both for whole markets and for individual firms. As accumulated experience doubles, costs come down by a predictable amount, say by 20 or 30%. Accumulated experience means the number of units of something that have ever been produced. It follows that in fast-growth markets like semiconductors in the 1960s and 1970s, or software markets in the 1990s, or internet-related markets today, accumulated production multiplies and costs plummet. As costs fall, new applications are opened up. So there is a tautological relationship between cost reduction and growth. Cost reduction is both a cause and a result of growth. Only by reducing costs or improving features or providing other forms of extra value can markets expand faster than other markets. Above-average growth is the reward for above-average improvement in delivering value. What happens in whole markets also happens in relation to individual corporations. Firms that grow faster than the market can increase their accumulated production faster than the laggards, and can therefore cut costs or increase value faster. By gaining market share, they actually also underpin the basis for defending and building further market share. They improve their relative cost position or relative value position. It is therefore an excellent strategy in a profitable market to build market share even at the expense of short-term profits. This is because by increasing market share, the firm will increase its ability to offer customers a better deal. And this is particularly valuable in high-growth markets because the improvement that is up for grabs is so much greater. In evolutionary terms, markets, firms, technologies, brands, and individuals who gain experience at above-average rates are actually speeding up the evolutionary process. They are packing in more generations in a shorter time. Each generational change offers scope for improvement. Yet, improvement only actually occurs if there is adaptive variation, that is, if each succeeding generation or version of markets, firms, teams, etc., produces something that customers like better, by doing something different that enables the market or firm to deliver better value, and to deliver improvement at a faster and faster rate. On its own, growth does not necessarily represent success. Many firms perversely choose to grow products and businesses that the market does not particularly like. The market typically takes its revenge by ensuring that the growth is profitless. Another caveat is that short-term growth, if not underpinned by the ability to sustain growth by providing real and continuously improving value, may subvert long-term growth or even lead to collapse. For a toy manufacturer to own the Cabbage Patch Dolls, or for a publishing house to have a single smash hit title, may be dangerous. There is an optimal short-run growth rate, which may not be the highest available, that will lead to maximum long-term growth. Remember Darwin's white bird in the Galapagos, which maximized survival of her family by allowing one hatchling to kill another. But provided that there is innovation, a sustainable ability to add ever-increasing value, the culling of failures and less successful variants, the investment behind whatever the market judges best, growth is the ultimate enabler of business success. Time-based competition. Time is a proxy for the passing of generations. This idea is closely related to the theory of time-based competition, which states that competitive advantage flows from minimizing the time it takes a firm to complete its activities and provide goods or services to the market, and the time taken to introduce a new product. The higher the time taken, the greater the cost, and the lower the degree of customer satisfaction. Compressing time, therefore, lowers costs and raises market share. A good example is the HY war of the early 1980s, which Honda won by introducing new motorcycles to the market faster than Yamaha. First, Honda came out with 60 new models in a year, then with another 113 in the next 18 months. Life cycles of industries are becoming progressively shorter. Industries that innovate faster grow faster. They gain industry market share or capture a greater share of an industry value chain. Firms that innovate faster gain share within each market. Individuals who innovate faster grow richer. Ulam's dilemma: is natural selection unfair? Mathematician Stanislaw Ulam realized that his discipline spawns nearly 2,000 new theorems every year. Very few of these survive because funding to investigate them is not available. Ulam's dilemma is that no one either inside or outside the mathematical profession was qualified to decide which few new theorems should survive and which fall by the wayside. This, he thought, was unsatisfactory. He wrote, "There is no assurance of survival of the fittest, except in the tautological sense that whatever does in fact survive has thereby proved itself fittest by definition. In other words, theories don't win on their objective merits, but as a result of blind competition." The parallels with business are clear. The best products or companies or executives don't necessarily rise to the top. The standard QWERTY typewriter keyboard is far inferior to other forms. Yet I am typing on it now, on a brand new personal computer. English is less efficient than Esperanto. Betamax was probably a better video recording technology than VHS, which beat it. The market is not always fair, and not always right. The same is true in nature. Poor early mutations sometimes take hold. Nature is sometimes wasteful and produces unnecessary organs, or allows them to remain, like the human appendix, long after they are redundant. Poor genes sometimes beat better genes. Sheer luck sometimes means that poor organisms reproduce while their better siblings suffer untimely death. In the short term, at least, nature is not always right. So what? Over time, selection tends to produce improvement. It is a weird and unfair system, and also imperfect, but on the whole it works extremely well. Almost certainly no other system would work better. The implications? Don't buck the market, even if you're sure that it's wrong. If the market feedback on a product or service is negative, trash it. If the capital markets appear foolish or bizarre, put aside your doubts, and try to divine the market's message for your strategy. Leave judgments on market sanity to investors. Remember the old motto, the customer is always right. So is the market, even when it is unfair or wrong. Evolving to avoid failure. In Darwin's theory, the conditions of life determine whether or not species survive. The environment disposes of or supports the species. The species does not determine the environment, nor even have the luxury of being able to adapt to it. In natural selection, failure is endemic. Failure is dominant. Success is the lucky exception. Is this too fatalistic and severe an insight to be useful in business? In one sense, yes. There are few second chances in nature, but in business, there are usually multiple chances. In a more profound sense, however, the lesson that failure is endemic is invaluable. If we realize that failure is normal, we come to view all business as an experiment, where success at the first attempt is not to be expected. Paradoxically, this is very good news. Whatever our failures, and however bad they are, spectacular success may lurk around the corner, given certain conditions and with a lot of luck. We would never have heard of Henry Ford if his first attempt at producing automobiles had been his last, or if his second attempt had quenched his determination. His third attempt succeeded because he finally hit on mass production as a way of lowering costs and standardization as a way of permitting mass production. Corporate failure is a good thing. Taiwanese companies frequently fail, yet their backers can easily start again, with superior results to other Asian countries, where unsuccessful companies survive as the living dead because underperforming loans are tolerated. Natural selection tells us why failure is frequent, and therefore how it can be avoided. Failure implies a lack of fit between the environment and the failure. Natural selection implies that failure is the natural course of events and that slight modification will not be enough for a turnaround. If a poor fit is to be turned into a good fit, at least one of two things must happen. Either the environment must change, or the failure must change, or most likely, both must change. Hoping that the existing environment will change is the prevalent strategy of failing businesses. The strategy nearly always fails for reasons that Darwin gives. The business has little or no control over the environment, but the reverse is not true. The normal course of events is failure. If failure is to be turned into success, expecting a transformation of the environment is typically futile. The way out is to find a different environment and to change the character of the failure. If a company is losing out in one market, it had better find another market more attuned to its capabilities, or change its character radically to serve the existing market in a different way. Since the existing capabilities were evolved to serve the existing market, it is extremely unlikely that there just happens to be another market out there for which the failing business's capabilities are hunky-dory. Variation is therefore probably required along both dimensions. The environment must be different, a different market segment, which implies at least one of the following: different customers, different location, different main business activity, different products or services, different competitors. And the firm's skills must change. Different employees, different skill development, different business models, different suppliers, different partners, different standards. If this attempt fails, fear not. It is time to start another business, using the best parts of the experience, contacts, and skills from the existing one. The same principle applies to individuals. If your career is not making satisfactory progress, it is time to change the environment. Get out of your existing business into a new one. But realize also that the market, your previous environment, has given you some valuable feedback. You need to ensure that your character and skills are developed so that the fit with the new environment will be dramatically better than before. Summary. Natural selection produces an ever richer, more varied, and successful world relative to the prevailing conditions of life. The results are fantastic. The process is astonishingly simple, but beyond our control and often unpleasant. We must understand the rules of the game because we cannot change them. Evolution obeys 3 principles. 1. Differentiation emerges from generality. 2. Each new differentiation then turns into a generality from which new differentiations emerge. And 3. Development depends on co-development. Species evolve more fully when other species co-evolve, and as Darwin said, all forms of life make together one grand system. The main business insight from these 3 principles is the opportunity to create new business segments. This opportunity always exists. All you have to do is to create a more specialized business segment, serving part of the existing environment with a newly evolved business formula and way of working that are particularly relevant to the new segment. In doing so, you should use the co-development principle as much as possible. That is, use the latest evolutions from other markets to help bolster your offering. If possible, using new partners who exemplify the highest level of evolution in other markets. Darwin added the principle of natural selection, where the odds against survival are high, resulting in a struggle for life, where the environment determines whether or not species and individuals survive, and where there is a large element of luck, usually bad luck, endemic in the process. The principles of natural selection can be observed in business. The only way to win is to be exposed to competition, to pursue variation relentlessly and continuously, to accept the environment's verdict, to be quick, and to be lucky. Products, services, and technologies should emerge from a struggle for life, from some formal or informal competitive process. New products and services will emerge from somewhere, from you or from competitors. Therefore, leave no niche unfilled, no potential niche exposed to innovation from new competitors. Cannibalize your own products and markets before you are cannibalized by others. Product and service improvements can always be accelerated. Realize that failure is par for the course, so encourage failure as a necessary part of the process of experimentation. And when success does come, ride it for all it's worth. Remember the constant imperatives of life. Change. The struggle for life, selection, variation, the further selection and competition. Don't be put off by the odds against success. Where there is life, there is the opportunity to vary, and where there is variation, there is hope of a breakthrough. Action implications. 1. Vary, reinvent, multiply, and vary again. Continuously evolve everything in your business life. Your products and services, your ideas, your technologies, your teams, your corporation, your collaborators, yourself. Evolution requires experimentation, variation, rejection of inferior or less well-received variants, hard driving to multiply the successful variants, and a commitment to further cycles of experimentation, variation, selection, and multiplication of the few winners. 2. Pursue evolutionary cycles repetitively, so that the quest for continual improvement via experimentation becomes routine. 3. Expose product ideas and products to full-bore competition. 4. Scatter product variants around your core products. Fill up the potential product space. 5. Drive successes as hard and fast as possible. Ensure that they have prolific sex lives. 6. Always accept the market's verdict, even when you consider it unfair. Don't give new products or failing products or businesses the benefit of the doubt. 7. Only expect to have a few winners, but get the most out of them. Welcome your failures. 8. If you're faced with a failing business or a failing career, quit. Find a different environment and change your character to fit the new environment better than any rival. And finally, 9. Keep reminding yourself that diversity works. Chapter 2. On Mendel's genes, selfish genes, and business genes. It is not success that makes good genes. It is good genes that make success. Richard Dawkins. People like to think that businesses are built of numbers, as in the bottom line, or forces, as in market forces, or things, the product, or even flesh and blood, our people. But this is wrong. Businesses are made of ideas, ideas expressed as words. James Champy. What Darwin couldn't explain. As we heard in Chapter 1, Darwin's explanation of evolution by natural selection was brilliant and convincing. For the first time, the mechanism of evolution was fully apparent and plausible. But there was one thing that Darwin couldn't explain. If traits were acquired, how did this work? And how were the acquired traits passed on? Darwin went round in circles on this issue. On the Origin, he frankly admitted, the laws governing inheritance are quite unknown. The problem for him lay in everyone's assumption that traits were blended from those of the parents. If this was the case, why didn't individual adaptations become watered down and disappear in a few generations? Mendel's Laws of Heredity. From 1856 to 1863, spanning the period when Darwin's great work was published, Gregor Mendel, 1822 to 1884, a monk in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, experimented with breeding and crossbreeding peas and other plants with distinctive traits. Mendel was surprised to find that the traits of the peas did not blend. A tall plant bred with a dwarf plant led to a tall plant, not a medium-sized one. A yellow pea crossed with a green one did not yield a greenish-yellow pea, but rather a yellow one. When he went on to interbreed the hybrid plants produced by crossing a tall plant with a dwarf plant, although the hybrids were all tall, a quarter of their offspring were dwarf. Mendel correctly concluded that the alternative traits themselves, whether short or tall, this shape or that, were inherited directly, apparently at random. Mendel's law of segregation states that inherited traits are passed on directly and equally by each parent. Rather than blending, the traits remain separate. Each trait is generated by two instructions, with the dominant trait determining appearance and the recessive trait lying dormant, but capable of emerging in subsequent generations. Mendel also proposed the law of independent assortment, which factor is passed on as a function of pure chance, with dominant factors no more likely to win in the next generation than recessive factors. The law of independent assortment also states that individual traits, not the whole complement of characteristics, are based on inbreeding. The 7 traits of Mendel's law each operated independently. Nobody paid much attention to Mendel during his lifetime. Shortly before he died, when he had swapped cross-breeding his peas for less pleasant duties as abbot of his monastery, chromosomes were discovered, although at first nobody knew what they did. The significance of Mendel's findings only finally became apparent in the 1900s, when it was guessed that chromosomes carried genetic information. Mendel's factors were eventually renamed genes and it was realized that each pair of chromosomes in a cell carries a great deal of genetic data. Between 1907 and 1915, American biologist Thomas Hunt Morgan, 1866 to 1945, bred fruit flies, and was surprised to find that one had white eyes rather than the usual red. Even more surprising was that the white eyes were passed on not in the next generation, but in the one after that. 1/3 of the fruit flies, all male, had white eyes, exactly as Mendel's laws predicted. In 1915, Morgan wrote, "The Mechanism of Mendelian Heredity," which showed that genes were physical entities located alongside chromosomes, and that it was the individual genes that were inherited according to mathematical probabilities. This finally solved Darwin's dilemma. If inherited traits are not blended, they can be passed on undiluted. Natural selection operates by genes, by genetic inheritance. Morgan also shed new light on how mutations occur. Small variations enter the population as alleles, alternative characteristics, with the environment exerting selective pressure on their adaptability. To use modern language, alleles are different types of genes, like the brown eye and blue eye gene, competing for the same slot on a chromosome. The word allele, therefore, can be used loosely to mean rival or competitor. Strictly speaking, an allele is one of the two alternative positions a gene can have on a chromosome. Thus, it is possible for there to be a considerable variation within one species. Mutations do not have to be large jumps. Specific traits can mutate, as well as new species. This is an important conclusion for understanding the nature of business progress.